Awesome. So as it gets darker out, I think everybody gets like way more quiet and chill. And so I'll try and keep you guys awake, keep you guys aware, present. No sleeping over there. Right? So going back to last week and just going through kind of what your weeks were like, anything that came up for you, anything that you noticed in terms of your patterns and the way that your patterns were preventing you from maybe being authentic. Um, Anybody want to share on that? Hmm?
So I had an interesting put on that. So
Right.
I was struggling with that as I was meditating.
Yeah. So I guess I try to reframe them because people are listening. But please correct me if I'm wrong. But the sort of, you're saying that some of these patterns, right, are authenticity,
Yeah.
right? They are the things that make us authentic and unique. And where did those things, like, what came first, the chicken or the egg, right? Like, out of my authenticity, did I start to develop this thing, or did this thing give me my authenticity? And the way I would phrase that, or the way that comes through to me, is that I think there's like a certain way that we exist in life that feels right, and that is true to us, and that in doing that we shine our light onto others, right? And when we live from that space, we begin to surround ourselves with love. We begin to, and we still have challenges because we're still growing, but it, when we get to that alignment, and we get to that sense of, these are the things that are making me authentic, the magnetism will start around those things, and it'll start to draw more and more in, and it'll start to grow and evolve and develop. Versus the flip side of that is when we're inauthentic and things start to magnetize kind of more inauthenticity, more misalignment, and then more sort of suffering or discomfort, right? And you just kind of see like, oh, some of the past patterns that I've developed might be supporting my authenticity, right? So I might have patterns of like, healthy eating, right? Reading is a big thing for me that I found in college, right? I didn't even know it was something that was going to bring me great joy. But all of a sudden I got into a children's lit class and read Harry Potter, and then read the next 3 Harry Potters, because they didn't even have like 5, 6, 7 yet, right? It was back that long ago. But I was like, shit, I really like reading. And like reading took on this meaningful, joyous experience for me. And then lo and behold, like I find out that like when I was a kid, I read like crazy. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting, right? So it's like, did I, was like, if that was fostered all along, would I have continued it all along? Is that like a part of my journey? But I think there are certain things in there that are like parts of our journey that are the authentic parts of ourselves that come out. But then there's all the other stuff, right? Like, why did I stop reading? Because I thought it wasn't cool. Because the other kids thought it wasn't cool. Because only losers read, right? And I actually stopped doing that along the way. And I picked up this inauthenticity, which was, sort of thinking that knowledge wasn't, or reading wasn't cool. And it took me some self-discovery to actually realize, no, this is something that I enjoy. This is something that brings me joy. And that, I refound that. So, yeah. It's not to say that all patterns are inauthentic, right? There are many things in your life that will be authentic, that will be patterns. But those things can also become inauthentic at times if they're used to cover up other challenges in your life. I hope that makes sense. I could go on about it, but It's good. We'll keep it concise tonight. What else? I'll call on you if
Small things, big things.
it's a huge pattern,
Yeah.
right? What did your parents do when you did something wrong? Were they like, oh, that's okay. We all make mistakes. It's great. It's a learning experience. How about we go, no. They were, no, they didn't. I try to do that with my kids only because I've read 17 books on vulnerability and raising kids, right? And how shaming them and making them feel guilty, like not you made a mistake, but you're lazy, right? There's a difference, right? It's like, oh, you're being lazy versus like you are lazy. And it's like, oh, you made a mistake versus you are a mistake, right? There's a big difference there. But like that's what my kids hear, and I see it in their face as soon as I yell at them for, something, and I'm like, don't do that, don't do right, and I see it in their face, like they feel like it's them, and then I have to say to them like, hey, listen, we're all allowed to make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time. I just made a mistake in the way I treated you, right? And I think, but we become so used to internalizing that as a way of pleasing others. And one of the things that we don't realize is that, right, they're just as much clueless and incapacitated by life as we are. And so their shame, their blame, their guilt tripping is just a reflection of us. And I'll talk a little bit more about that this week because it's very pertinent to the topic. But how do we sort of how do we separate it back out, right? Because this week we were looking at the patterns, right? We were looking at the things that prevent us from being authentic, right? We were looking at the characteristics that we've taken on that are ways that we could shield ourselves from feeling vulnerable or from feeling lesser than, right? Guilt is just a way that we sort of allow ourselves not to feel lesser than, right? Because if I just felt it, I'd be like, oh, wow, like I made that mistake and I really feel lesser than. And it's like, oh no, like I'm so sorry, like I feel so bad. And it's like, but did you really feel that? Did you really experience it? Because maybe then you wouldn't even have to apologize, right? You might just be like, okay, like I've experienced that, like I'm not gonna do that again anymore. And I think there's a key difference there in how we integrate the feelings, right? That thing happened, it created this sensation, and that sensation is based on the patterns in your past where that thing has happened before. It's not like this was some unique thing, right? It's happened before, created the sensation based on that circumstance. You got this emotion of guilt, lesser than, not good enough, nobody's gonna like me, I'm never gonna be accepted, right? I'm such an outcast. I might as well just take the first mission to Mars, right, and go out there. But where did all that come from, right? Where did all that arise? That because I did something wrong, now I'm a bad person, right? And so how do we get out of that, and how do we transform it? And we'll talk a lot about that today. Yeah. What else? Who else had patterns? Anybody have anger? Anybody get angry this week? Yeah? What'd you get angry about?
I decided, okay, I don't want to be angry anymore, and I just changed my attitude and actually wrote him a very nice email and felt very good afterwards.
That's awesome. So she got angry and then she meditated and meditated and meditated some more, and then the anger transformed. now let me ask you, like, in your meditation, like, so you, like, this is, we sort of get angry, or I'll speak from my experience, but I think it's common to all of us, like, we get angry at a person for what they did, right? And we get angry at them because they did something, right? But then if we meditate, and if, like, in my experience, if I sit for long enough, if I breathe for long enough, and I allow that, I experience that emotion for long enough, and I just hold it, like, I'll start to realize that, like, they didn't really have any intention necessarily of doing that, and it wasn't they weren't trying to make us angry, they weren't, like, violently trying to enrage us, but it's some pattern that I've accumulated, that I've taken on in my life, that makes me get quote unquote angry, feel rage when, XYZ. So did you have that experience? Did you kind of get there where you're,
Yeah, I think it was more like an expectation because I was approaching my project like with the best intention towards this person, and then the person just didn't appreciate it. So
right?
I got angry, and then the way he addressed everything,
Yep.
the way he treated me.
Right.
So I guess it was just my projection and my expectation
Right.
that he's gonna be nice to me.
Yes.
So
Yes. And these are like, they're not everybody is a good person. we I am a terrible person in certain situations, right? And not intentionally, but because of those things, right? So, if you didn't have that tool, you could have, fired back at that client like, listen,
I was gonna do it.
right, like, I don't like the way you treated me. I don't think you appreciate what I'm doing. I have the best intentions here. And listen, you're wrong, right?
And actually, I got okay from my boss that I'm
Right.
supposed to do that, and I never
Right.
did it. I wrote the nicest email, and
Yep.
kind of it all disappeared.
And it was very different, right? You had a very different experience because of that, and they did as well. And so, but they're like, we're all going to be mistreated, right? We're all going to have loved ones that get hurt. We're all going to lose people, right? These things are facts of life. We're all going to get old. We're all going to get sick, and we're all going to die. that is the way it's going to be, and it's going to suck, right? But at the same time, we'll talk about this tonight as well. It's like, does it have to, right? Does it have to? How has my mind been framed to interpret those things? How has my through my experience, how have I been imprinted as to what those things mean and what they are? So we'll go into that more later. What else? Who had sadness? Right? Yeah. Yeah. Fear, anger, grief. Those are like the primary drivers, right? Those are like the three indicators of some place where we become unintegrated if we're holding on to them, right? They might arise, and then I might be like, oh, that's really interesting. I'm going to go sit with that, and I'm going to see what it really is, because I know it has nothing to do with that person. Like, they're not intentionally trying to hurt me, right? And even if they are, I can dismiss them, and then I can go into the experience myself and start to experience that and be like, oh, that's where that comes from. And then when I experience it and I treat it and I hold it and I integrate it, like, what I'll notice is that now that I've shifted that energy, that unconscious patterning, like, it won't show up in my life as much anymore. Or it'll show up and it's a little bit softer next time. And it's a little bit softer. It's a little bit softer. And then the next thing I know, I'm helping somebody that's going through that. That's where it becomes really interesting. So, yeah. What'd you have, Holly? Anybody not feel anything at all? No yeses on that one. The quietest people are always the most angry people. I only speak that from experience.
I feel like my anger always, I don't get angry if he was a human.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you like, I mean, if you didn't get taught how to express anger, and none of us get taught how to express anger very well, that I've seen, right? We talked about it last week where I said, you know, there's a place where anger becomes about setting a boundary, right? Where you feel like you're being attacked or you feel like you're being violated, and it's really about setting that boundary and saying, you know, hey, this is not okay with me. But not necessarily coming back at the other person and starting to attack them, which is what happens a lot with anger, is we then call our client an asshole, right? And that's, you know, and go back on the attack rather than saying like, you know, I appreciated your feedback, but in the future, or I appreciated your feedback, but I also want you to know, you know, that I've worked really hard on this, and I may have made a mistake, but I will make up for that, right? And then it's clean again. But it, you know, it's really hard to express anger in a healthy way. It's really hard to put up boundaries when all we want is love and acceptance, right? And we're afraid if we put up that boundary and tell people like, listen, I'm not going to put up with this, right? That we'll lose that love and that acceptance. And the way that might come up is like, we might be afraid we're going to lose our job, right? You have to start to mentalize and realize that like, you accepted a position, right? There was an acceptance there, right? There is an appreciation for you in what you do, hopefully, right? And so that in that position, there's also love and acceptance, right? And we're afraid of losing that. And so we may not necessarily say the things that we're thinking or we're feeling. And it becomes very dangerous when you have past patterns and emotional imprints and emotional residue wrapped up around that thing of love and acceptance, of being trusted, of being, you know, valuable. And then somebody crosses that, right? Or the universe finally brings a situation to you that wants you to take notice of that. And rather than taking notice of it and going into it and being with it and experiencing it and integrating it, you're like, no, universe, get the fuck back out of here. You're an asshole, I quit, right? And you storm out. And did that help? I don't know. Probably not. But it's a process, right? Where, like I said, if you know, it comes around this time and you're like, okay, I'm going to sit with it. I'm going to integrate with it. I'm going to see where it takes me to. I'm going to hold it. And then I'm going to let it go again, right? And then it's going to come back around, you know, and there's going to be another situation where it's like, okay, I'm angry, but this time I'm not going to blame myself, right? I'm not going to ignore it and push it aside. This time I'm going to sit with it. I'm going to be with it. I'm going to let it transform me. And then I'm going to notice, okay, why did that upset me, right? What was the trigger for that? And where did that originally arise in my life? And it might just be about going back and healing that, or it might be about creating a new pattern in your life, right? It might be about actually having to create this new pattern in your life, that there's a pattern in your life that's no longer serving, and you're ready to heal it, so you integrate it, and then there's some actual work to be done on the outside to shift that pattern, right? Or it might just be I heal the pattern, and then it fades away, right? It just, and all of a sudden it doesn't happen anymore, right? I don't get super awkward in social situations and start talking about jokes and sex all the time. Right?
What if you set those boundaries and the person still doesn't get what your boundaries are?
You got more work to do. So if it's not being reflected, there's more work to do. If you're still getting triggered, there's more work to do. Don't blame it on them. You're trying to.
So you continue to let them disrespect you.
No, no, you don't continue to let them disrespect you. How are they still disrespecting you if you've set a boundary?
If they still do the same thing.
What is
that
it?
This,
But how would they still do the same thing if you set a boundary?
I mean, just having fun.
So there's a lot wrapped up in there,
Yeah.
right? There's a lot wrapped
So
up in
I
it.
thought disrespect is saying, I don't care what you do, but just tell me that you're listening to me, tell me what you're doing, you know.
Yep.
Like I turn around and you're totally gone.
Yeah. So this is like awesome. This is the perfect example because it's like you had this emotion, you had this sensation of disrespect, and you blamed it on this other person. You said it's your fault that I feel disrespected because of your actions. Is it?
Well, I guess I just had an expectation of, okay, we haven't seen each other for a long time. Let's go
Right.
do an activity and socialize together and
Yep.
talk and all that, and that didn't happen.
Right.
I'm saying, why the hell did I drive you 40 miles to do this thing where you can
Right.
do your own thing?
So you blame somebody for your expectation not being met.
But is it her fault the second time around? Because she said that she already told
Yeah,
her.
I told her.
Right?
As George Bush said, fool me twice,
I just
shame
said-
on
I just said,
something.
I just said, it's okay, just tell me what you're, what you're doing.
Right.
It's,
So it's really
common courtesy to me.
Expectation, right?
so this is the thing, right? Is that like we want to be victims or victors, right? We want sympathy or we want sort of celebration. And that's not the way the universe works. It's much more mysterious than that. Right? If you start to really pay attention to it, what you'll start to see is it's just your unique journey unfolding. Right? That's what you are. You are this unique journey unfolding. Right? Nobody's gonna win. Nobody's gonna lose. Right? We're all going the same place. But what I think is interesting is that, right, is you got triggered by that person doing that thing because you had this expectation, and maybe you felt in the past like, you know, your friends haven't been that close to you, or they haven't supported you where you supported them, and you put yourself out there and you've really done a lot more than they do for you. And so when this person didn't sort of reciprocate that, all of a sudden you were upset because you didn't feel like they loved you the way that you love them, right? And so you then said to them, no, I want you to behave this way, because if you behave this way, I'll feel loved. And they're like, sure, that's cool. Like, I can totally do that. And then they go off on their merry way, and right, and then they go back into their patterns, which their pattern was, oh, sweet, we're gonna hang out. I'm gonna get to go explore things and do things, and like, they weren't necessarily there for the same reasons. And that's okay, right? And if we communicate over those things, it helps a lot, right? But a lot of us are not good about communicating our needs and our wants, because when we did it as children, what happened? We were shut down, right? We were told those things aren't important. We were told that we're not good enough for those things, you know? And so now what you have is like, okay, what would have been the way that I would have handled that, right? How would I have handled that with all my infinite wisdom that I've accumulated over the past 3 or 4 months? No, I'm just kidding. But what would be a more authentic way to approach that, right? You could have noticed you're getting triggered, noticed that it was happening, and been like, oh, that's really interesting. Like, I had this expectation that, we were going to hang out, and you just left and didn't let me know where you were going. And that's really interesting. Like, why would I get that reaction? Right? Why would I have that occur within me? Like, where did I pick that up along the way? How did that become a pattern? And then you'd be like, oh, okay. And maybe you go back and maybe you see a few moments, right, in your life where it's like, oh, that's where I picked that up. Like, that's where that started. Like, maybe it was high school, right? Maybe it was elementary school, right? And I start to see that was a behavior, a sensation that gets triggered in those situations. And then you could, so that's the pattern that has happened in the past. And we become very limited because of that. But if you can integrate it on the fly, you can then open back up, right? And maybe there was actually something else in that experience for her to experience. But because she shut down and went to this one thing and became like a horse with blinders on and could only see that in that experience, it got even worse, right? You became even more misaligned.
No, I